So we've got buff Skitarii Rangers, enormously better arc rifles, and plasma weapons that aren't quite so lethal to the Kataphron destroyers. Let's take a look at this arsenal of the Omnissiah with this massive weapons preview from Games Workshop. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we've got yet more news about the new Admech Codex, and Games Workshop seemingly delivering on their promise that a lot of the Admech wargear is going to get considerably more lethal. In summary, we've got better Ranger galvanic rifles, a really big boost to the slightly underwhelming arc rifle, enormous improvements to Cognis Weapons, and a few buffs to Kataphron Servitor weapons and Rust Stalkers. I'd guess that these changes are going to come with at least some points changes for some units, so we very much don't know the full picture yet, but it's still pretty interesting to see how these weapons are going to be functioning if you actually do get the models on the table. So first up, it seems that the Skitarii Rangers are going to have considerably more teeth. Previously their galvanic rifles were at least long ranged, but very underwhelming in terms of damage output. 30-inch range, strength 4, AP 0 and damage 1, rapid fire 1 weapons, and they got an extra pip of AP if you rolled a 6 to wounds. The new profile has two quite big changes. First of all, they're heavy 2 rather than rapid fire 1, and rather than getting that AP -1 only on 6s, you now get it all the time. For your basic troops rifle, it's really quite a potent weapon now, and they'll be shooting pretty much as hard as a Space Marine Intercessor, even though they're going to be costing significantly less points. First up, I think the change to rapid fire to heavy 2 is really good for these guys. They're typically used for more objective camping roles anyway, and this means that your standard guys sat around on objectives will be able to contribute quite a bit more. Even on the move though, it's not terrible. You're still going to be averaging at least one hit with the galvanic rifle each turn, so it's not the end of the world if you have to move and fire, in my opinion. I think this does provide a bit better differentiation between the Rangers and Vanguard units. Rangers are now quite solidly the sit at the back and score objectives or hold down the battle line option, whereas the Vanguard are the advance towards the enemy and take the fight to them option. Secondly, that AP -1 is very nice. Maybe not the biggest change ever against harder targets that you might have been wounding on 5s or 6s, but against infantry where you might be wounding on 4s or 3s, it's a massive boost. Certainly to make these guys feel a little bit less like incidental fire when you're firing against Space Marines and things. Even if they go up a point or so, I still think it looks like Rangers will be coming out ahead based on these changes. Next up, they've shown us one of the special weapons that Rangers and Vanguard can take, and it's a buff to arc rifles. These things have got a pretty whopping 4 different boosts, all to the same gun, and now they look far more like the heavy arc rifles carried by the Kataphron breachers rather than the standard affair that you had before. Previously, I felt they were kind of underwhelming, not awful, but not really going to change too much to what the squad could do. They have a 24-inch range, rapid fire 1, strength 6, AP -1 and damage 1, and got D3 damage against vehicles. The new profile has been absolutely supercharged though. The range has gone up to 30 inches, the AP is boosted to -2, so far more effective against tank armor and Space Marines. The standard damage has been boosted to D3, and it goes up to a flat 3 against vehicles, so even more bite against them. And to make sure that they're not underwhelming against their ideal targets, you also get to wound on a 4+ against vehicles, regardless of how tough they are. So certainly decent against vehicles, but honestly these things look like general purpose weapons that'll be good against almost anything now. I think there was a reason that people took Kataphron breachers with arc rifles quite so commonly. That strength 6, AP -2 and D3 damage is generally going to be useful against whatever you point it at. In particular, it's a very good profile for dealing with targets like Space Marines, particularly Gravis armoured ones, where they're going to be wounded on 3s, only saving on 5s, and D3 damage is really quite effective against 3 wound models. They're still not going to be cutting down tanks all by themselves. 2 arc rifles and a small Vanguard squad, for example, would average you around about 2 or 3 wounds to your standard vehicles, but still that's pretty potent chip damage there, combined with other fire. I suspect they will be used a lot more on Vanguard, as they'll be a bit more free to move forward with their assault weapons, and points cost depending, I think they're going to be a lot more taken than they were before. I really wouldn't be too surprised to see these go up to more like 10 points for the upgrade though, rather than the 5 that you have to pay now. Just as an aside, Games Workshop did say that the arc close combat weapons would get a similar boost against vehicles. I believe we've seen the arc maul go up to significantly better strength and better AP compared with previously, though it still remains 1 damage. Next up we have some serious buffs to Cognis Weapons, which previously had a funny sort of special rule where you could advance and fire them, but you'd be -2 to hit. This just meant in reality that no one would want to bother advancing with them, apart from in really niche circumstances, so the rule was very rarely used. There was the cap on modifier rolls in 9th edition, but to be honest I think it just makes things a lot simpler just to make them assault weapons in the first place. Other than that though, all of them do seem to have been slightly upgunned. I think that this is just to represent that the Admech get slightly superior weapons compared with the rest of the Imperium, as they keep all the best technology and upgrades to themselves. I don't think that we're suddenly going to see damage D3+3 las cannons across the board at any point. That would be a bit of a surprising move from Games Workshop for me. In any case, as for the other buffs, Stubbers are going up to 4 shots each, as per every other Stubber that have come out in the new codexes. This means that things like Dune Riders or Archaeopter Fusiliers are going to be putting out massive amounts of Stubber fire, 16 shots per model. That's really going to be quite impressive against very light infantry. Cognis Flamers have a bit of an unexpected change. Rather than just Assault D6 auto hits, they're now 12-inch range and Assault D6+2 auto hits. That means a single Cognis Flamer on something like a Kataphron Destroyer is going to be pretty effective. You're now averaging a pretty impressive 5 or 6 auto hits rather than the standard 3 or 4. For the Iron Striders, in changes that we saw on one of the leaked datasheets already, it seems that Cognis autocannons are going to be 3 shots each, or 6 for the twin one, and the twin las cannons haven't gained any shots, but they get damage D3+3 rather than the standard D6. I think they're both really quite nice buffs to the Chicken Walkers, though I do suspect that most Admech vehicles are not going to get the core keyword, so probably won't have quite the same devastating firepower synergy that they can get access between the Codex and Engine War. On the plus side though, at least they should be able to operate a bit more independently. The las cannon buff is also pretty good on the Archaeopter Stratoraptor. That thing's now going to be packing some very serious firepower and good mobility. Finally, there's just a few more hinted buffs for the Kataphron Breachers and Kataphron Destroyers and Rust Stalkers. For the Breachers, their torsion cannons have also been upgunned. They're now 48-inch range and damage D3+3. Out of anything, I think they really did need a buff, to be honest. They were one of the only Breacher and Destroyer weapons that was just really quite bad at the moment. Even now, I still wonder whether they will really compete. They look like decent dedicated anti-tank, but pretty much all of the other options kill vehicles quite well as killing other things because they have more shots. As for the Destroyers, the Plasma Culverins are now significantly safer. They now only cause you 1 mortal wound to the unit when they're overcharged and you roll a 1, not an entire dead model. This is really quite a nice boost to them and makes them a bit more usable, particularly when the models are so expensive, currently costing 53 points each for some very heavy firepower, but not all that great durability. I would be quite surprised if the Riser Stratagem survives into the new Codex completely unchanged. I suspect it might be toned down at least a bit, but still will be interesting to see how much of a plasma death ball you can make out of these things in the new decks. Lastly, we come to the Rust Stalkers, who have just got a massive AP boost on their transionic razors and blades. They haven't shown off the rest of their stats or anything, or whether they still retain the mortal wound ability, but now those transionic razors are AP -2 and the blades are AP -3. In my opinion, it's a much needed boost. You just can't really justify elite assault infantry quite as well. If they are just AP 0 and are only really going to be super effective against light infantry. It'll be interesting to see if the new changes stack up against the Fulgurite Electro Priests, which are very much the go-to shock assault infantry for piling out of a Dune Rider these days. So really quite a lot of interesting and quite impressive gun buffs for the Adeptus Mechanicus right there. Look forward to hearing your thoughts and ideas on the changes down in the description, and whether this is good news for any of your own Admech forces. If you'd like to keep up with Games Workshop's news and reveals, feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics, where I do try and cover any new rules changes that come out. I'll most certainly be reviewing the whole Admech Codex when it drops, so feel free to subscribe if you'd like to see that. Finally, if you'd like to help support the channel, I'd just like to mention that I do have a Patreon page which you can find down in the video description, and it is the Patreon page that allows me to make videos quite so regularly. I do try and give a few decent benefits for supporters of the channel. You get to see certain new videos early, there's regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and you get automatic entry to the prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good, or you'd just like to help support the channel, then feel free to check out the Patreon page, which is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.